Pontypridd, a town with a clang of industry and the dreams of men seeking fortune, was where Freddie Welsh's story began. Born on March 5, 1886, into a world of promise, he wasn't raised in the coal-dusted streets like so many others. His father, John Thomas, was an auctioneer, carving out a living amidst the bustling growth of the town. Their home on Morgan Street was a place of warmth, and young Freddie had the kind of upbringing most boxers of his era never knew: education, stability, and a family that wished for him a future beyond hard labor. But life has its way of shaking even the firmest foundations. A few months after Freddie was born, his mother convinced his father to buy the bridge and hotel, a decision that would change everything. While his father continued working, his mother ran the hotel, a demanding task that only grew harder when tragedy struck. Freddie's father passed away when he was just 10 years old. Suddenly, the household was split apart. His siblings, Kate and Stanley, were sent to live with an Ann and Merthyr, while Freddie found himself under the roof of his maternal grandfather in Raider. Loneliness clung to him like a shadow. The ache of missing home grew unbearable, and after a year, he returned to Pontypridd. His mother had remarried, but Freddie's yearning for adventure and independence had already taken root. At 14, he left school and took up work as a boilerman. It was tough, exhausting labor, and the thought of spending his life toiling in factories weighed on him. Then, at 16, a daring idea took hold. With 3 friends by his side, Freddie set out for a new life in Canada. The promise of adventure was intoxicating, but reality hit hard. His companions found work with ease, but Freddie struggled. He hopped from one job to another, never finding steady footing. Then, fate stepped in. He discovered a passion for fitness, becoming obsessed with physical culture, inspired by the teachings of Bernard McFadden. His body transformed, and with it, his mind. But homesickness gnawed at him once more. Determined to return, but broke, he did what he had to. He worked his way back to Britain aboard a cattle boat, arriving with nothing but the lessons he'd learned and a hunger to carve his own path. Boxing found him in the shadows. He took up amateur fights in Scotland, far from Wales, where he feared his mother's disapproval. The rush, the discipline, the feeling of control was addictive. He had discovered what he was meant to do. With barely any money in his pocket, he made a bold move. He set sail once again, this time for New York, aboard the Baltic on its maiden voyage in 1904. New York City wasn't the land of opportunity he had imagined. It was ruthless. Work was scarce, and Freddie took whatever came his way. He labored in farm fields, washed dishes in back alley kitchens, and even carried banners through the crowded streets. One night, while sleeping in a cheap hotel, he was mugged, left with nothing. But fate had a funny way of rewarding the relentless. The hotel manager, seeing his desperation, offered him work as a porter. It was here that his path crossed with a woman who would become part of his story: Brana Weinstein, a Russian Jewish immigrant who had changed her name to Fanny Weston. Freddie's boxing career didn't begin under bright lights or roaring crowds. It started in the gritty corners of New York, where he scraped by as an instructor at a physical culture institute. He slept in the gym, ate whatever meals they provided, and made just $1 a day. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Then, a newspaper advertisement caught his eye: wanted, smart, active young man who can box. He answered it and landed a job at Knipes Institute, where he sharpened his skills. When the gym struggled financially, he took odd jobs shoveling snow in Harlem, working in another gym for just $8 a day, barely enough to eat. But he didn't complain. Every punch, every training session, every hardship was fuel for what was to come. Freddie Welsh was no ordinary fighter. He was a man who had gambled with fate, endured hardship, and built himself from the ground up. His name would soon echo in boxing rings across the world. But it all started here in the backstreets of New York, in the cold of Canada, and in the heart of a boy who refused to settle for anything less than greatness. He was hungry, literally. Days would pass without a decent meal, and nights were spent curled up on the rough wrestling mats of the gym. But despite the struggle, he refused to go professional. It wasn't just about the rules of amateur boxing. It was about his mother. He couldn't bear the thought of her knowing he was fighting for money. His friends saw his hardship and wondered why he wouldn't accept the easy money that came with private fights. At first, he resisted, but hunger has a way of changing a man's mind. The next day, he stepped into the ring against Kid Allen. The fight didn't last long. By the third round, Allen was out cold. And just like that, the door to his future opened. One by one, he kept winning Johnny Mezier, young Peterson, Jack Cameron. The money was steady, and for the first time in a long time, he could afford proper meals. At just 19, he made the decision. He was turning professional. Still, his dreams stretched beyond the ring. He moved to Philadelphia to teach at Herman's Institute, holding on to his passion for culture, while Fanny, his closest confidant, stayed in New York to finish her studies. But before his first pro fight, he faced a dilemma his name. If he failed, his mother would know. If he won, she might still find out. He first considered Fred Kimry, a nod to his Welsh roots. But when he wrote to Fanny, she had a simpler suggestion: Welsh. So, Freddie Welsh it was. With Jack Clancy as his manager, he made his professional debut on December 21st, 1905, against young Williams at the Broadway Athletic Club in Philadelphia. He didn't just win, he knocked Williams out in the third round. More fights followed. On January 25th, he went 6 rounds with Johnny Keeley, with no official winner declared, a common practice in Philadelphia at the time. But then came Eddie Fay, another fight, another knockout, this time in the 6th round. As his reputation grew, so did the challenges. His next opponent, Tommy Feltz, was no pushover. A seasoned journeyman, Feltz was expected to take the fight, but Welsh had other plans. The match went the distance, and when the Philadelphia item named Welsh the winner, it was considered an upset. With confidence growing, Welsh took on an intense schedule, sometimes fighting twice a week to sharpen his skills. In March 1906 alone, he fought 4 times, defeating Tommy Love and Kid Stinger, securing a points victory over Eddie Lenny, and battling to a draw with Johnny Dohan. Then came the rough patch. Billy Mayharg handed him a loss, and fights against Frank Carsey, Jimmy Devine, Tommy Love, Matty Baldwin, Billy Willis, and Tim Callahan didn't go his way either. The newspapers wouldn't declare him the winner, and for a moment, doubt must have crept in. But Welsh wasn't the type to quit. The hunger he had once felt, the kind that left him lying awake on gym mats, was nothing compared to his hunger for success. This was only the beginning. The life of a fighter is never easy, but Freddie Welsh had a spirit that couldn't be broken. In May, just 2 days after a tough scrap with Tim Callahan, he was back in the ring, this time against Jack Reardon. It was another no-decision fight, but the press believed Welsh had done enough to take it. There was no time to dwell on it. He marched forward, defeating Kid Gleason and stopping Mike Laughlin in just 2 rounds. June brought a familiar face, Frank Carsey, a rugged Chicago native. They fought hard for 6 rounds, and again, no official winner was named. But this time, the press leaned toward Carsey. Welsh wasn't bitter, though. In fact, over time, the two would become more than rivals. They became close friends. Carsey even ended up in Welsh's corner for some of the biggest fights of his career. But before that, there was more work to do. Welsh ended June with a grueling battle against Billy Glover, barely squeezing out a win. Then came young Ern, a smart fighter from Philly. This fight wasn't about strategy. Both men threw caution to the wind, standing toe-to-toe in a 6-round war. The crowd loved it, and when the dust settled, the press gave Welsh the nod. Then came a new challenge, his first 20-round fight, and his first bout outside of Philadelphia. The destination? Dayton, Ohio. The opponent? Australia's lightweight champ, Hawk Keys. Things took a bad turn in the 6th round when Welsh injured his right hand. Most fighters would have folded, but Welsh, he simply switched to his left and kept fighting. For 11 rounds, he fought one-handed before dropping Keys twice in the 16th round, then again in the 17th. The referee had seen enough. It was over. Welsh had won. The victory earned him a much-needed break. But boxing never stops moving. When he finally returned to the ring, it was another 6-round war against Jimmy Dunn. This time, the press favored Dunn. That didn't sit well with Welsh, so they ran it back. Only this time, it was scheduled for 20 rounds. The fight was a marathon, both men refusing to back down. When the final bell rang, the referee called it a draw. The crowd erupted in anger, but Welsh had no time to argue. The year wasn't over yet. He fought twice more, picking up wins over Willie Moody and Kid Gleason. His career was on fire, but boxing wasn't his only concern. Just days after beating Gleason, Welsh received devastating news from back home. His mother was seriously ill. Without hesitation, he left everything behind and boarded the Etruria, heading back to Britain. Because no matter how tough the fight in the ring, some battles in life mean even more. When Freddie Welsh returned to Britain, he wasn't a star. He wasn't even well known in boxing circles. But that was about to change. Despite his mother's illness, Welsh wasn't one to sit around. He arranged fights, determined to prove himself in his homeland. His first bout was at London's National Sporting Club against Seaman Arthur Hayes. It went 6 rounds, and Welsh took the win on points. Then came a tougher test, a 15-round battle against young Joseph. Again, Welsh walked away victorious. But something was missing. He had fought in America, in London, but never in front of his own people. So, on April 17th, 1907, he put on a special boxing display in Pontypridd. There wasn't a single opponent who could match his level, so Welsh took on 3 local fighters, one after the other. Not one of them lasted more than 3 rounds. The message was clear. Freddie Welsh was home, and he was ready to take over. A month later, on May 21st, he got his chance. He stepped into the ring against Johnny Owens, the unofficial lightweight champion of Wales. The fight had a 50-pound purse and the Welsh lightweight title on the line. But from the second round on, it wasn't a contest, it was a one-sided masterclass. Welsh dominated, leaving no doubt about who the better fighter was. After taking a break for 2 months, he returned with a win over Sid Russell. The next day, he showed up at an exhibition in Pontypridd, where he sparred with Jim Driscoll. This wasn't just any sparring session. Driscoll was one of Britain's best, and he would become a huge part of Welsh's career. August came, and so did another victory, this time over young Lilly. Then, he beat former amateur featherweight champion Dick Lee. Welsh was on a roll, and his name was starting to mean something. But then came the fight that changed everything. At the St. Mary Hill Fair in Pencoed, a boxing booth was set up by Frank Guess. Driscoll was the main attraction, and the Barker made an open challenge. Any man who could last 6 rounds with Driscoll would earn £1. Welsh stepped forward. Now, Driscoll and Welsh were friends. In fact, Driscoll had been in Welsh's corner during his last fight. But when the bell rang, something changed. Welsh wasn't just trying to last 6 rounds, he was fighting. He threw punches that were borderline illegal, kidney shots, rabbit punches. Driscoll wasn't expecting it, and more than that, he was furious. Welsh had made a name for himself that night, but he had also made an enemy. Driscoll would never forgive him for what happened in that ring. And in boxing, bad blood always finds its way back to the surface. After avenging his win over Seaman Hayes in September, Freddie Welsh received an unusual invitation, a private fight, set up by local industrialists. They were offering him £100, plus a hefty purse. But this wasn't just about money. Some people felt Welsh had become too American, picking up Yankee habits and forgetting where he came from. So they set up a fight to test him. His opponent, Joe White, a Swiss-Canadian who had also learned his craft in America, but was now living in Cardiff. The setting? A converted loft, packed with only 60 hand-picked spectators. The fight was brutal. By the 11th round, White was suffering, but he refused to quit. It took 5 more rounds before he finally threw in the towel. Welsh had passed the test, but despite the win, some people still whispered, was he truly one of their own? On October 3rd, Welsh fought twice in one night in Pontypridd. First, he took on Gunnar Hart, the Royal Navy's welterweight champion. After 5 rounds, Hart was done. Next up, Arthur Ellis. Same result, another stoppage in 5. That night will be the last time Welsh ever fought competitively in his hometown. The next morning, he was on a train to Liverpool. His destination? America. He boarded the Lusitania and set sail for New York. Before he even arrived in the U.S., Welsh had one last fight in a courtroom. Back in 1902, when he left for Canada, he had given £8 to a friend, David Davies, to help cover the trip. But Davies denied ever receiving the money. When Welsh saw him in Taft Street in June, he didn't waste time with pleasantries. The case went to court. Witnesses backed Welsh's story, and the judge ruled in his favor. Freddie Welsh had a point to prove. His time in Britain had hurt his reputation in America, and he needed to rebuild it. He started strong with an easy win over Pal Moore, then traveled to San Francisco to face Matty Baldwin. Welsh dominated the fight, winning on points and impressing the crowd. His name was back in the conversation, and soon, he got the news he had been waiting for. Ad Wolgast had agreed to fight him for the world title. The build-up was intense, with both camps using the media to gain an edge. Just days before the fight, the appointed referee, Eddie Smith, died unexpectedly. This led to heated arguments between Welsh and Wolgast's manager, Tom 10% Jones, as they fought to get a favorable replacement. A chance encounter on Windward Avenue in Venice, California, turned into a shouting match, with Jones threatening to knock Welsh's block off. Knowing he was in the weaker position as the challenger, Welsh had no choice but to accept Jones' pick for referee, Jack Welch. Then, disaster struck. The night before the fight, news broke that Wolgast had been rushed to the hospital with appendicitis. The title fight was off. Instead, Welsh fought a last-minute replacement, Willie Ritchie, going the full 20 rounds. He didn't lose, but without the world title on the line, it felt meaningless. In early 1912, things got worse. During a wrestling session, Welsh dislocated his neck. He couldn't fight, and, having lived beyond his means, was running low on money. Leaving San Francisco, he went to Canada for an exhibition match with Jack O'Brien before heading to Chicago with his wife, Fanny. Desperate for cash, he took short fights in New York and Buffalo, where he faced Jimmy Duffy. Overweight and out of shape, Welsh still managed to win, proving he wasn't done yet. In Buffalo, he met his friend Elber Hubbard, whose philosophical conversations reignited his passion. Welsh set his sights on reclaiming his British title. In September 1912, he returned to Britain aboard the Mauretania. A rematch with Matt Wells was scheduled for November, but first, Welsh warmed up with a points win over Jack Langdon in Liverpool. The Wells fight at Covent Garden was a tough battle. Wells dominated the early rounds, but Welsh turned the tide in the 6th with a brutal combination. By the 10th round, the match was even. Welsh took control in the later rounds, and after 20 grueling rounds, he was declared the British and European champion once again. Before he could celebrate, news arrived from America. Willie Ritchie had beaten Wolgast for the world title. Welsh was now in a prime position to challenge for it, but first, he had to fight Australian Hughie Mahegan for the British Empire title. The fight went the full 20 rounds, and while Welsh won on points, he took a brutal beating. For days afterward, the pain kept him from sleeping. Then, another devastating blow. His mother passed away. Grief-stricken, Welsh put his world title ambitions on hold and stayed in Wales to be with his family. When he returned, he wasted no time getting back in the ring. He fought 4 more times, starting with a 3rd-round stoppage of Paul Breviers in Aberdare. He then won on points against young Nipper, defended his European title against Raymond Vitette, and finished with a tough points win over Eddie Beatty. The last 3 fights happened within a single week, and it nearly cost him. In the 9th round against Beatty, Welsh was knocked down and barely beat the count, but he found a way to survive and take the win. Despite everything, the setbacks, the losses, the pain, Freddie Welsh refused to give up. His journey had taken him through highs and lows, but he knew one thing. He was still chasing the world title, and he wouldn't stop until he got it. Freddie Welsh wasn't in America just to fight. He was on a mission. After missing his chance against Nelson and Wolgast, he was determined to get in the ring with Willie Ritchie. To make it happen, he teamed up with Harry Pollock, a flashy New York promoter who knew how to keep a fighter's name in the headlines. When Freddie and his wife, Fanny, arrived in New York on March 29, 1913, Pollock made sure the press was there, cameras flashing, reporters scribbling. But Ritchie's camp wasn't biting. His manager, Billy Dolan, announced that Ritchie was off to Europe for 4 months to fulfill some theatrical commitments. The champ wasn't interested, at least, not yet. Freddie couldn't sit around waiting. He had to stay active. So on April 28th, he stepped into the ring with Al Ketchel in Bridgeport and went the distance. He kept moving, fighting in Canada, racking up wins over Jack Redmond, Kid Scaler, Billy Farrell, Ray Campbell, young Jack O'Brien, and Martin Murphy. Everywhere he went, he won. But he needed more than victories. He needed attention. So, in between fights, he made a big reveal. He and Fanny had actually been married since 1905, a secret they had kept from nearly everyone. And to really make headlines, he joined race car driver Bob Berman for a record-breaking speed run in a Blitzen Benz, flying across the track in just 50.8 seconds. By now, Ritchie was back in the ring, but his return wasn't impressive. He struggled against Mexican Joe Rivers, only escaping with a knockout in the 11th. Welsh knew he had shot, and finally, a fight was set for September 4th, 1913, in Vancouver. But just before the match, disaster struck. Freddie rolled his ankle in training, forcing a delay. That wasn't the worst of it. On the eve of the fight, Ritchie suddenly left Vancouver, claiming he was unhappy with how the filming rights were being handled. Freddie was furious, but before he could even process the disappointment, something else happened. His gold belt from the Commonwealth fight against Huey Mehigan was stolen from a tea room near his training camp. Days later, an Australian named Henry Beckett was caught trying to smuggle it out of the country. The belt was recovered, but it felt like everything was going wrong. Instead of sulking, Welsh did what he did best. He fought. With just 3 months left in the year, he lined up 5 fights. He won on points against Fighting Dick Hyland and Leo Kosick in Montana. He took on Milburn Saylor, who was disqualified in the 9th for a low blow. He outboxed Phil Bloom in New York before heading back to Canada, knocking out Arthur Ellis. Even though he was struggling with his weight, Freddie kept pushing forward. He beat Johnny Dundee in New Orleans, outpointed Frank Whitney in Atlanta, then stopped in Philadelphia to take on Sam Robideau, his 3rd win in 3 different cities in just 10 days. 5 days later, he was in Kansas City, where he humiliated Mickey Sheridan for 30 straight minutes in a one-sided fight. Freddie didn't stop there. He took on Earl Fisher in Cincinnati on January 26th, then Leo Kelly in St. Louis on January 29th, winning both on press decisions. He was now in top shape, his bank account was full again, and he had one thing on his mind: getting Ritchie in the ring. The American press still called Welsh a has-been, but he and Pollock had a plan. If Ritchie wouldn't fight him, Freddie would go after every top contender in the division until Ritchie had no choice but to face him. Welsh was done waiting. He was coming for the world title. Freddie Welsh wasn't just chasing a title. He was chasing a legacy. The first man on his hit list was Mexican Joe Rivers, a fighter who had already failed twice in his bid for lightweight gold. But before Welsh could get to him, he stumbled. Jimmy Duffy handed him his first loss since 1911, outpointing him over 8 rounds. It was a setback, but not a roadblock. On March 17, 1914, in Vernon, California, Welsh and Rivers squared off. Rivers was the favorite, but that meant nothing once the bell rang. Welsh picked him apart, round after round, showing the world why he deserved a shot at the championship. When the final bell rang, there was no doubt. Welsh won on points. That night, at a victory dinner, Welsh was handed a newspaper article about King George V expressing his admiration for boxing. Never one to miss an opportunity, Welsh wrote the king a thank you letter. The next day, a telegram arrived, direct from the palace. The press ate it up, printing the Royal Exchange and papers across the US and the UK. Welsh had just punched his way into the headlines without even throwing a punch. But press clippings wouldn't win him the title. He needed Willie Ritchie in the ring. Welsh reached out, offering a fight in England if the money was right. Ritchie agreed, but when he named his price, $50,000, win or lose, Welsh nearly laughed him out of the negotiation. That was double what he expected. Still, Britain was hungry for a world champion, and a London syndicate managed to raise $40,000 on the condition that Ritchie fought no one else beforehand. Ritchie agreed, sort of. He accepted the money, but insisted he would fight whoever he pleased. True to his word, he stepped into the ring against Charlie White in Milwaukee. It was a disaster. White rocked him early, battered him for most of the fight, and was declared the winner. But since he didn't knock Ritchie out, the title stayed with the champion. That's when Welsh and his manager, Harry Pollock, played their ace. They sent Ritchie a telegram. Promoters have called off match with you. Want us to meet White. It was a bluff, but Ritchie fell for it. The next day, he agreed to fight Welsh for $25,000 plus expenses. Just like that, the deal was done. Welsh set sail for Britain, arriving on June 12th to even more good news. His wife, Fanny, had just given birth to their first child, Elizabeth. With a title fight ahead and a daughter waiting to meet him, everything was falling into place. On July 7th, 1914, in London's Olympia Theatre, the moment Welsh had been waiting for finally arrived. From the opening bell, he was in control. He danced, he jabbed, he made Ritchie miss. It wasn't until the 6th round that Ritchie landed anything meaningful. The American kept searching for a knockout punch, but Welsh was too slick, too sharp. By the 17th round, Ritchie knew he needed something big, but it never came. When the final bell rang, the decision was clear. Freddie Welsh was the new lightweight champion of the world. Ringside experts had him winning 10 rounds, Richie 5, with 5 even. He had done it. After the fight, he retired to the Waldorf Hilton to meet his newborn daughter for the first time. It should have been the start of a long, lucrative reign. But just 25 days later, Germany declared war on Russia, and World War I began. Welsh had planned to cash in on his title with theater appearances, but the war crushed those dreams. He lost over $50,000 in music hall engagements. Needing a way back to America, he pulled some strings and secured first-class passage for himself, Fanny, and Elizabeth on the Olympic. Some in the press accused him of cowardice for not joining the British Army, but Welsh fired back. "I could do more for my country out of the trenches than in them." With war raging in Europe, Welsh focused on keeping his title. In 1914, only 2 U.S. states, Colorado and Louisiana, allowed 20-round fights with official verdicts. Since no promoter in either state was offering enough money, Welsh did what many champions of the era did. He fought a string of 10-round, no-decision matches. As long as he was standing at the end of the fight, he kept his title. But Welsh wasn't just looking for easy paydays. He took on serious contenders, proving he was a worthy champion. On October 27th, he outpointed Matty Baldwin in Boston. 6 days later, he was in Madison Square Garden, facing former champion Ad Wolgast. The crowd was with Wolgast, and for 5 rounds, it was close. Then, in the 6th, Wolgast blocked an uppercut with his forearm, and his ulna snapped 3 inches above the wrist. He fought on, using only his left hand, but after the 8th round, he couldn't continue. A week later, Welsh took on Charlie White, the man many believed was the true top contender. The fight was held in Milwaukee, and Welsh put on a masterclass, landing 4 punches for every one of White's. White had the heavier hands, but it wasn't until the 10th round that he managed to draw blood. By then, it was too late. Most reporters didn't give him a single round. By 1915, many expected Welsh to retire. Pollock even announced that he'd fight just 4 more times before hanging up the gloves. But Welsh kept going, holding on to the title until May 1917, when he met Benny Leonard of the Manhattan Athletic Club. Leonard was young, fast, and dangerous. In the 9th round, he sent Welsh to the canvas. The champion got up, but Leonard was relentless. Blow after blow landed, and the referee finally stepped in. For the first time in his career, Freddie Welsh had been knocked out. His reign was over, but his story was written. From a relentless contender to a world champion, Welsh had fought everyone, ducked no one, and left a legacy that would last far beyond his final bell. Freddie Welsh was honored with induction into the Ring Boxing Hall of Fame in 1960, followed by the Welsh Sports Hall of Fame in 1994 and the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 1997. In 2008, the Ronda Sanantev Council decided to commemorate his legacy by installing a blue plaque at his former boxing club. The following year, Welsh boxer Dower unveiled the plaque in his honor.